What was God's design for the family? Well, family starts with the institution of marriage. That's where God started. In Genesis 1 and 2, right at the beginning, God creates man, he joins him with woman, and tells them to make a family. The family is rooted in the created order. It's woven into the fabric of reality from the very beginning.
If you are watching today's podcast, you will notice that I am here alone in our professional studios, aka kitchen table, and Erin is not. And I just have some really bad news. We've had to fire Erin from the podcast. Wasn't living up to expectations, and so, of course, those of you who have been with us for a while know that there's just a little more sarcasm. No, actually, I wanted to do the intro today. Last week, we played you a special podcast of Christopher Yuan at our 2023 MAVEN Conference in Southern California. The theme was restoration. Christopher Yuan talked about restoring God's design for human sexuality. Fantastic talk. Well, this week, we want to bless you with another talk. It's actually Erin's talk. And her talk was restoring God's design for the family. And it was a great talk. And Erin did a fantastic job of really laying out something that is so foundational. And that is a theology of family. Kind of what is the biblical worldview when it comes to family. And this is a topic that she takes us a little bit further into, a little bit deeper into than just saying, hey, it's mom, dad, and kids, and because the Bible says so. But she gets us to think through a theology of family. And what are some of the challenges and kind of recapturing this theology, this biblical worldview, and then what does that mean for us practically? And so here is Erin talking about God's design for family.
Well, in 2020, the conservative syndicated columnist David Brooks did an extensive multi-article series in The Atlantic regarding the state of the family in American life today. And his title was attention-getting. The nuclear family was a mistake. Nuclear family being mom, dad, kids. And here's his subtitle. The family structure we've held onto as a cultural idea for the past half century has been a catastrophe for many. It's time to figure out a better way to live together. Can you see why the article grabbed my attention? Now, Brooks correctly diagnoses some of the problems plaguing modern families today, such as increasing rates of divorce, the rising number of single parents, the fragmentation of families, the increasing narcissism of the culture. According to Brooks, the breakdown of the family has created a perilous situation for our society today, with record levels of isolation, depression, loneliness, suicide, drug and alcohol abuse. He rightly concludes today's crisis of connection flows from the impoverishment of family life. Our culture is in serious trouble because our families are in serious trouble. But next, Brooks, a self-identified conservative, takes aim at the conservative view of family. And this is what Brooks writes. He says, social conservatives insist that we can bring the nuclear family back, but the conditions that made for stable nuclear families in the 1950s are never returning. Conservatives have nothing to say to the kid whose dad has split, whose mom has had 3 kids with different dads. Go live in a nuclear family is really not relevant advice. Now, while Brooks cites the research showing that the nuclear family actually has benefited men, women, and children in the past, he argues that our current state is so bad, is in so much disarray, that a return to the nuclear family as the model is now just an impossible task with our current conditions. As Brooks says, the nuclear family was a mistake. So the only option now is to find replacements. Brooks' article is just one example from our culture that thinks the nuclear family is a mistake, or at minimum, isn't vitally important. We see the undermining of family in different areas and spheres of our culture. In government, for example, no-fault divorce, the untethering of marriage from one man, one woman institution, to laws that block parents from important oversight over their own children. For example, laws that allow female minors to get abortion without their parents' knowledge, let alone their consent. That's just government. In education, public schools are hiding a child's gender transition from their parents. The family is undermined by a government employee who acts as if these kids belong to them, or at minimum, that they know what's best. In social movements like Black Lives Matter, whose website used to have the statement as one of their values being, "We disrupt the Western prescribed nuclear family structure requirement." In business, companies advocate for remaking of the family as they weigh in on how we should view the family, even as they pitch their products to us. As but one example, the company Tylenol, that makes pain reliever medicine, put out this commercial regarding their view on the family.
When you first considered a family? When you fell in love? When you got married? When you had kids? When did you first fight to be considered a family? When you fell in love? When you got married? When you had kids? Family isn't defined by who you love, but how. Tylenol.
In entertainment, let me give you just a glimpse into how pervasive and serious this issue is, with an example from the world of entertainment. Now, how many of you are familiar with the children's animated television show Blue's Clues on Nickelodeon? Anyone? So, do you know who the target audience is for Blue's Clues? It's basically 2 to 5-year-old children. Well, during the 2021 celebration of Pride Month, Nickelodeon released an animated video on their YouTube channel, which featured a pride parade hosted by an animated drag queen. The theme? How we can remake the family.
Hey, Blue, look at all these families.
Hi, families!
It's time for a pride parade.
Families marching one by one, hurrah, hurrah. Families marching one by one, hurrah, hurrah. This family has 2 mommies, they love each other so proudly, and they all go marching in the big parade. Families marching 2 by 2, hurrah, hurrah. Families marching 2 by 2, hurrah, hurrah. This family has 2 daddies, they love each other so proudly, and they all go marching in the big parade. Come on, friends! Families marching 3 by 3, hurrah, hurrah. Families marching 3 by 3, hurrah, hurrah. These Babas are non-binary, they love each other so proudly, and they all go marching in the big parade.
Now that goes all the way to 10, so if you do want to watch all of it, you can go to YouTube. I'm going to stop there. 2 to 5-year-olds. So pause and consider what you just watched. The targeting of young children with a radical revisioning of family. The undermining of family is all around us. So it's easy for us, all of us, to become desensitized to it. It's so common now, we really barely even flinch when things like this happen. Now again, back to David Brooks. He does get something right. Families are broken. This is what the world around us is feeling, and this is what they're responding to. And we feel it too. But their claim goes further than just that families are broken. When they say the nuclear family is a mistake, they're saying God's design for family is a mistake. The culture wants to remake family, but God wants to restore the original design for family. Now, when you have a long-standing institution like the family that has existed throughout human history, that is so foundational to human civilization, and now you're calling on us to tear it down and remake it, it might be wise to pause just for a moment and consider what we are attempting to do. So in the early 20th century, G.K. Chesterton, who was a Christian theologian, warned about tearing things down when he said this. In the matter of reforming things, don't you love his hair, by the way? He was having a bad hair day. He had lots of bad hair days, actually. Okay, so this is what he says. In the matter of reforming things, there is one plain and simple principle. There exists in such a case a certain institution or law. Let's say, for the sake of simplicity, a fence or a gate erected across a road. The more modern type of reformer goes gaily up to it and says, I don't see the use of this, let's clear it away. To which the more intelligent type of reformer will do well to answer, if you don't see the use of it, I certainly won't let you clear it away. Go away and think. Then, when you come back and tell me that you do see the use of it, I may allow you to destroy it. But the truth is that nobody has any business to destroy a social institution until he has really seen it as an historical institution. If he knows how it arose and what purposes it was supposed to serve, he may really be able to say they were bad purposes, that they have since become bad purposes, or that they are purposes which are no longer served. But if he simply stares at the thing as a senseless monstrosity that has somehow sprung up into his path, it is he, not the traditionalist, who is suffering from an illusion. In summary of Chesterton's quote, don't take down a fence unless you know why it was put up. Our temptation is to look at the urgency of the challenges and chaos surrounding us. And in this case, it's the breakdown of the family. And that's our temptation, is to start there, is to just look right now at what's happening. But as followers of Christ, the current cultural moment is never, ever the starting point for us. Instead, we begin with God's larger story, not the present moment. Our starting point is a larger Christian worldview, the scriptures, our theology. Why? Because the moment does not dictate how we think about family, and it should not dictate actions we take. First and foremost, God's truth dictates what we think and what we do. So, what was God's design for the family? Well, family starts with the institution of marriage. That's where God started. In Genesis 1 and 2, right at the beginning, God creates man, he joins him with woman, and tells them to make a family. The family is rooted in the created order. It's woven into the fabric of reality from the very beginning. One man, one woman, becoming one for one lifetime. Notice this account comes from Genesis 1 and 2. We haven't gotten to Genesis 3 yet. And what happens in Genesis 3? The fall of man. Sin enters the world. Therefore, marriage and family is actually a pre-fall institution, before the fall. It was God's original design for human beings from the start. Not a solution to a problem, but the way he wanted it to be, before there ever were any problems. Last year at MAVEN's pre-conference event, this is how John Stonestreet put it, and I love it put this way. Marriage, he said, is like gravity, more like gravity than a speed limit. And this is what John meant. We didn't create gravity. Gravity is something we discovered as a part of the nature of reality. In contrast, speed limits are just something that cultures create. When you study the history of human civilizations, did you know that you will not find a civilization or an ancient people who came up with this idea of marriage? Instead, it seems to have always been there, just like gravity. And guess what? It has. Marriage and family was instituted by God at the very beginning of creation. Family is not merely a Western idea. So, here's what we discover. God erected the fence. The family is his creation. This is no small thing. The structure of the family is built into the creation order, so when people try to remake it through government, education, social movements, business, entertainment, they're actually attempting to reorder the very nature of reality. Or as Christian social commentator Rod Dreher puts it, the remaking of marriage and family in our culture today, he says, is not just a social revolution, but it's a cosmological revolution. It's man's attempt to reverse and re-engineer God's creation. We are trying to tear down something that we did not put up, the actual order found in creation itself. So Christians must recognize that this is God's original design, but can we explain why? Why has God designed the family this way? Why did God build this fence? The beginning of Genesis not only describes God's creation of the institution of family, but it also actually provides the why. Let's read Genesis 1, 27-28 to get some insight. 27 says, "So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. God blessed them, and God said to them, 'Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over every living thing that moves on earth.'" In verse 28, we had God's first commandments to humanity, what's commonly referred to as the cultural mandate. This is the why God designed marriage, to be one man, one woman, becoming one for one lifetime, because marriage and family are God's primary and preferred means to fulfill the two commandments. First, create families, be fruitful and multiply. Second, to create culture, to subdue the earth and rule over it. Think about it. These are the very activities that God partakes in Genesis chapter 1. First, God forms the world. Then second, he fills it. Then God commands us to do the same thing. It's as if God's saying to us, I created first. I made you in my image. Now you go and create as well with what I've already given you. Fulfilling the cultural mandate is one of the most important and significant ways that image bearers image God. But he doesn't just say, do this any way you want. A good God puts up fences to show us how to do it well. Marriage and family is not merely a means of personal fulfillment, but as it turns out, marriage and family can bring about much good in our lives. The nuclear family, father, mother, kids, is the best context for human flourishing so that we can fulfill the cultural mandate. Glenn Stanton is the director of the Global Family Formation Studies at Focus on the Family, and he has analyzed the social science data that overwhelmingly shows that marriage and family accomplish 4 primary goals for human flourishing. The first one, it regulates our sexuality by keeping it within the boundaries and safety of marriage. I'll let Christopher Yuan unpack that one in the next session. Number 2, it civilizes male nature. I would love to unpack this one, but Brett limited my time, I think, so that I couldn't unpack this one. Talk to me after if you want to. It protects and empowers women. Marriage and family do this. And 4th, it provides the healthiest environment for raising children. The Heritage Foundation has done a mountain of research on this topic, which can be found at their website, and I highly advise you go there. But here's just some of the summaries that I pulled from all of their findings in social science. So 1, decades of statistics have shown that on average, married couples have better physical health, more financial stability, and greater social mobility than unmarried people. Other studies show that children of those couples are more likely to experience higher academic performance, emotional maturity, and financial stability than children who don't have both parents in their home. The social and economic costs of family breakdown are paid by everyone in a society. Children raised in single-parent homes are statistically more likely to abuse drugs and alcohol, exhibit poor social behaviors, and commit violent crimes. They're also more likely to drop out of school. And when it comes to fighting poverty, there is no better weapon than marriage. In fact, marriage reduces the probability of child poverty by 80%. This is just a small glimpse of the data. Humans can best flourish when they live according to God's design for marriage and family. Not only do we see the huge benefits to children who grow up in a home where their mom and dad are married, but as it turns out, it's good for men and women too. In turn, healthier families are good for local communities and then for the larger society at whole. Now, we just spent the first part of this talk laying out God's design for family, which has been traditionally referred to as the nuclear family. So, now that we're all uncomfortable, how many of us have experienced something other than God's original design in your family of origin, meaning the family you grew up in, parents, siblings, or in your family now? So that means somewhere in your life experience of family, you've seen divorce, infidelity, single parenting, foster parenting, step parenting. The list could go on and on. How many of you would say, yes, I've experienced something other than God's original design for family? I'll start by raising my hand. Anyone else in here experience? Yeah. I mean, looking around the room, that's a lot of us. It's good to know we aren't alone. So it's good and okay to say. So most of us have actually experienced brokenness of family, either from something we've done, something that was done to us, or maybe a messy combination of the two, or maybe even it was through tragedy and loss that was out of everyone's control. It's okay to admit the brokenness, because actually by admitting it, we're acknowledging God's original design, that there is a way things are supposed to be. But just because things are broken doesn't mean we give up on God's original standard. I'm going to say more about brokenness, but first, I want to offer some practical ideas for ways that we can help restore God's original design for family. This is what G.K. Chesterton said almost 100 years ago. He said, "There's an attack on the family." Really? 100 years ago. Would you have guessed that they would say 100 years ago, there's an attack on the family? So I love reading that because I think, oh, it's not just a modern thing. Again, we are so stuck in our moment that sometimes we forget Christians have been living for a long time and cultures have been dealing with sin since the beginning. So we have to have proper expectations that there is an enemy that has been coming for family for a long time. So he didn't stop there. He said, there's an attack on the family, and the only thing to do with an attack is to attack it. So our response is not to shrink back. Our response is not to retreat. Our response is not to give up on God's truth. Instead, actually, a godly response is to fight. It's to fight for families. So how do we do that? Well, I think one area is that we fight publicly for the family. Now, this can include many things, but for some ideas, it should include advocating for laws that protect and promote the institution of the family, and voting for representatives that support those laws. This might mean attending some local school board meetings and speaking out on behalf of the kids in your community. Another way we need to fight is to fight personally for your family. If you're married, fight for your marriage. Confess the ways you've sinned against one another. Forgive one another. And then redouble your efforts to strengthen your own marriage. Get help from others, friends, your church, professionals if need be. Fight for your kids. Protect them from the false views of the culture, especially when they're young. So how do we do that? Well, one thing, we have to be aware of what they're watching. Are the shows and movies that they watch portraying marriage and family in a twisted way from reality? You might need to pull your kids from places where parents and family are undermined. School, sports teams, friendships. I've experienced this at the doctor. If I was recently at the doctor with one of my kids and this happened, but this has happened many times to me. In the doctor's office, it suggested to my teenager that I could leave the room if they wanted to talk to the health professional about something in privacy. You should refuse to do that, as I did. The first time I was so upset, I said something like, "Over my dead body." You could be more measured, probably. But I would find a new doctor. And thirdly, churches must be powerful allies to family. Churches must never compromise God's design as the standard. Church leaders don't condone alternative versions of family. Churches don't bless same-sex marriages. Churches lovingly confront cohabitating couples in your church. At the same time, churches need to come alongside families to help navigate brokenness and to help rebuild and strengthen broken families. The church must be the adopted family for broken families. And actually, the history of the church is filled with stories of Christians working in the brokenness and bringing help and hope. I wish I had the time to tell you so many of them. So this is just a various amount of ways that we can help bring God's restoration back to the family. So a few moments ago, when I had us all raise our hands, and there's a lot of us in here that have experienced broken families, and this is why we need a whole world view, one that addresses both the restoration and the redemption. And the Christian worldview provides hope amidst brokenness. God can redeem brokenness. My life is an example of that very thing. I grew up in a loving Christian home, but I had no interest in following God. I rejected him starting in about junior high. And by high school, I felt like I had a pretty good handle on figuring things out for my own life. Then 4 months before my high school graduation, I found out I was pregnant. I had planned to go out of state for college, and my longtime boyfriend was also heading out of state, actually on the other side of the country to take a football scholarship. I refused to have an abortion, which meant that I was going to be a single teen mom right after my 18th birthday. Through a small little church here in Southern California, I found a teen mom group and ladies leading it that understood the redemption that God offers all of us, even a pregnant teenager. My brokenness was actually the thing that pushed me to recognize there is a way things are supposed to be, and this was not it. When you have a new little baby, living in your parents' home, even loving parents and 3 awesome sisters that help you a ton, but without a husband, you feel the brokenness. So, in that little church, I repented of my pride, my rebellion of God, my rejection of his design. And as a big, pregnant 17-year-old, I received the grace of God provided through the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. He restored my soul. A couple years later, I met and married my husband, Brett. And after we were married for several years, he was able to legally adopt my daughter, restoring something else that had been broken. Life has been hard and messy. Lots of tears, a lot of trials, but lots of joy and lots of triumphs. But God's design for family and for marriage is so obviously good to me, especially because I did it the world's way at first. But now I can clearly see the goodness of his created order. So Christians, let us never forget the goodness of God, even when we're surrounded by brokenness. Humanity needs to return to God, not remake what he's designed. As G.K. Chesterton noted, we disregard God's design at our own peril and to the peril of those around us. This triangle of truisms, the father, mother, and child, cannot be destroyed. It can only destroy those civilizations which disregard it.
MAVEN exists to help the next generation know truth, pursue goodness, and create beauty for the cause of Christ. To find out more, check out maventruth.com.